Welcome to the next lesson, Designing Your Product Packaging. And here's what we'll be covering. The different types of packaging options that are available, how to decide what goes on your packaging, how to include product instructions, what you should have received from your supplier, and how to get your packaging design created. The different packaging options that you'll have available will primarily depend upon your product and your supplier. And most of your options will be one of the following. There are cardboard folding boxes when you want to use a lot of color and graphics and images and text on the outside of your packaging. There's also blister and clamshell packaging when you want to show off the product right through the packaging. There are bottles with labels, which are really common and easy to use for vitamins and supplements. And then we don't really care about having the most fancy packaging. You can always use clear bags that are called poly bags. These are also good for liquid products. In case they leak, they won't get out and all over everything else. And oddly enough, this product shown here is a poly bag filled with poly bags. And then another trend is to create packaging that is green and recycled, such as the image shown here. Now, these may not look quite as good as a brightly colored glossy box, but depending on the type of customers that you have, they may appreciate you taking the time and spending a little extra money in creating packaging that is better for our environment. Now, how detailed you get with your packaging will depend upon you. It could be as simple as a logo printed on a plain box, or it could be a custom designed print with graphics and lots of wording on it as well. Now, usually, the nicer the packaging, the better the perceived value when the customer receives the product. So for example, if you spend 50 cents more on packaging for your product, it might allow you to charge up to $5 more or even more than that because the customer receives it and thinks that they bought an even more expensive product. In that situation, it could be well worth the 50-cent cost. However, simple and clean can still work very well for your very first product. Most importantly, you want to make sure you have a high quality product, then the packaging isn't as important. So how do you decide how detailed to go? Well, the first thing to consider is your target customer. What do they value? And then balance that also with your budget constraints. While packaging does play a role in your product's success, there have been incredibly successful products with even the simplest of packaging. Think about Apple. Apple has some of the best products in the world, is one of the most successful businesses of all time, and yet their packaging, while elegant, is actually very basic. Once you decide what type of packaging you'll be using, you still have to decide what's going to go on it. And how do you do that? Well, one easy way is to simply go to Amazon or physically go to the store and look at as many similar products as possible and even take pictures. I still do this today. When I go to local stores, if I see a product that I'd like to source, I not only take a picture to help me remember what that product is, but also to show me what type of packaging they were using. Now, the safest bet for your packaging is to do something similar to what your competition is doing. However, I said similar, and you simply cannot copy their packaging exactly. You need to use your own graphics and images and text and make it your own packaging. If you get lazy and copy someone else's packaging, it's a surefire way to have a copyright problem later on. Here are some common items you'll want to consider to put on your packaging. First, there are the basics, such as your logo, the name of the product, your brand name, and the UPC barcode. Then you might also want to include your website and any social media sites that you either are or plan to be on. I like to include just the icon for the social media sites that we're on. You don't actually have to list out your entire link to them on those sites. If you have any information that's unique to your product, such as the size and color, you also want to include that. And if you have any images or instructions, if they're necessary for your product and you don't have them inside of it, you can include them on your packages as well. Now, this is important. If your product is being imported, you will need to include the words made in China or made in whatever country it actually was made in somewhere on the product packaging or on the product itself. Not having it on there can cause issues when you're importing your product. It does not have to be very large and big and bold, just somewhere clear on the packaging or the product. Now let's talk briefly about adding barcodes to your product packaging. We already know that you need a UPC or Universal Product Code in order to list your product on Amazon. Rich already talked about that and also showed you how and where to buy them. And we're also suggesting that you add the barcode for that UPC to your product packaging. However, Amazon also requires that another barcode altogether called the FNSKU, which stands for Fulfillment Network Stock Keeping Unit, that they also add this barcode sticker over your existing UPC barcode when the products get checked in at all Amazon warehouses. The FN SKU is a very specific type of barcode unique to Amazon, and it helps them tie that product to you as a seller and track the product's movement throughout their warehouses. So you may be thinking, if Amazon is going to just cover up the UPC barcode that we're designing on our packaging with their own FN SKU barcode, which one should we put on the packaging? Should we just put the FN SKU on ourselves? Well, you have two different options. The preferred one, the one we're talking about, is to put your UPC barcode on your packaging, just like we talked about. Even though it is going to be covered up by the FN SKU code, it gets your product ready to sell in other markets in the future, and it makes it look more professional. Every product in the world has a UPC barcode on it, so it just makes sense for you to start thinking bigger and have that on your product as well, even though it will be covered up by another Amazon sticker. Now, there is an alternative. You could decide to put the FN SKU barcode on your product instead of the UPC. It will save you 20 cents per unit by having this done yourself. You can have your supplier put the stickers on. An inspection service could apply the sticker over the UPC for you, or you could even have it designed into your packaging instead of the UPC. And again, this will save you 20 cents per unit by doing this yourself. The choice is up to you, but keep in mind that we still prefer the UPC option since you're building a brand and you may decide to sell elsewhere in the future. And if that's the case, then that FN SKU will not be of any use outside of the current Amazon market that you're starting off selling on. Now, one question we always get is, can I just use the UPC and not even worry about the FN SKU at all? The answer is yeah, you technically can do that, but we don't recommend this. And in order to do that, you would select the manufacturer barcode instead of selecting Amazon barcode when you were converting your product over to FBA, like Rich Henderson showed you in an earlier lesson. By doing that, it'll make this happen. However, we found that it causes problems down the road, which is why we don't recommend it. We want you to choose Amazon barcode, and we want you to use the FN SKU because it'll make your life easier right now. Now, Amazon is testing out trying to move more and more sellers over to this method where they just use the UPC, but we're still recommending declining this offer for now. And if we find that at some point this does make sense, we will absolutely let you know. If your product requires instructions so your customers know how to use it, well, you have a few options. One option, if the instructions are simple enough, is to simply put them on the packaging. And if your competitors are doing it, chances are you can do it as well. Now, if your product needs a little bit more information, an instruction manual can be created, printed, and inserted right into the packaging. In the next lesson, Automatic List Building, will cover a service that can be used to help you create these. And then the third option is to simply include the instructions and maybe even videos right on your website. Once you know what your packaging options are and you have an idea of what you want to include in them, you actually have to get your packaging designed. And it can be a little overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. So here's the process for getting your packaging design. Step one is to make sure that you have everything that you need. In the previous lesson, you asked your supplier to send your packaging options. And if applicable, they should have also sent you a template that your packaging designer can use. Now, here are a few examples of what templates look like. The first one is a sample template for a bottle that has a label wrapped around the outside of it. And then this bottom one is a sample template for a cardboard box packaging. You'll notice that lots of dotted lines on here. Some of them mean that the packaging should be folded there, and then other ones are what are called bleed lines, where you want to make sure that nothing is printed in outside of them. You don't have to know all that. Your packaging designer will know exactly what those stand for. Once you're sure you have everything that you need, the next step is to find a designer. If you're willing to pay for the service, you have a few professional options out there. One of the best that we've seen is something called 99 Designs. And you can find them by going to this link here, AmazingSellingMachine.com/99, and it'll take you right to their site. The cost for this is typically around $450, but they do a fantastic job, and you'll actually have multiple professional packaging designers creating different designs and showing them to you so you can choose the best one. Now, of course, there are some cheaper options out there. You could always ask your supplier to do it. Many times they'll be willing to do this, especially to get your business, but just be sure that you do all the wording and rewording of it to make sure that it uses the right language and you put it into the way that you want your brand to sound. You could also go to Fiverr.com or Upwork.com and try to find packaging designers there too. They absolutely exist there as well and are much cheaper than the 99 designs option. And then another option, if you have the skills, you could also do it yourself, depending upon what kind of skills you have and how complicated you want your packaging to be. So here's what we covered in this lesson. The different packaging options that you have depend upon your product and your supplier. And you can choose to make your packaging as detailed or as simple as possible. It really is your choice. And you could also get your design done professionally using a site such as 99 Designs or using a cheaper service such as Fiverr.com or even your supplier. Now your action is to go get your packaging designed once you have all the information that you need. And next, we're going to talk about the power of package inserts and building your customer list. I'll see you in the next lesson.